current state of the WWE brand extension, right? We're used to the brand extension. It's come, it's gone. It's been around since 2002. And in my eyes, I think right now WWE is having the most successful version of the brand extension. And part of why, this is a good time to bring it up, right? AEW, WWE and AEW, it seems like for the last couple of years, and probably even more so recently with WWE being hotter and AEW having attendance issues, is people talking about the rivalry between WWE and AEW and essentially the competition. So to bring you back to the origins of the brand extension, that's how it was created. WWE buys out both ECW and WCW and realizes it has no competition, so it creates competition within itself. The brand extension exists. It's good. They have brand exclusive pay-per-views. They have Raw versus SmackDown at Survivor Series, all that kind of good stuff. It then goes away when it starts to get lame and people start to go from one show to the other. They start bringing the brands back together again. Then all of a sudden, you got all this influx of talent. The WWE Network, they bring it back. They all of a sudden have brand exclusive pay-per-views again because not everyone's getting the time, what have you. We try it out. And the brand extension is something that's in intensive purposes, here to stay. And I think right now, the fact that, people say WWE and AEW are competition, I think what makes it so that WWE, when they say things very callously, like Triple H might say in a press conference where, AEW, they don't look at them like competition. Partly because they have the brand extension going on within WWE, and they do have that own competition within WWE. So, and also, and on top of that, part of this brand extension, I think, is NXT right now. I think NXT was a brand under the black and gold. And I think even though it is more developmental now than it was under the black and gold, it is still its own brand. And we'll talk about that, obviously, later on in the show with NXT Deadline this weekend. But one thing I noticed at Survivor Series, and the thing I want to, I guess, mention about this brand extension, and this is, Brandon, where I'll bring you in and give your opinion, right? So, obviously, Survivor Series, not Raw versus SmackDown this year. We haven't had any Raw versus SmackDown in the last couple of years for anything, which is another part of why I think this is the best version of the brand extension. But to me, I think this is the best version of the brand extension because this topic right now, out of the blue, out of nowhere, people are like, what are you talking about? Why are we talking the brand extension in the middle of December? And I think that's why this is the best version, because Survivor Series this past year, without anybody realizing it until the show ended and I had to think about it, every one of those matches was brand exclusive, was wrestlers that only competed on those brands, and not one time in any of those matches did I think Gunther versus The Miz, did I think this is a Raw match. Not one time in the main event did I say this is a Raw match, or last year did I think this is a SmackDown match. Obviously, the Women's War Games match, that was a SmackDown War Games match, and not one mention of any of the matches did we think of the brands in which they were involved. When we think of Seth Rollins and the championship, we don't think Raw. We don't think SmackDown with Roman Reigns, right? Am I wrong here in thinking because of that reason, that's why this brand extension is doing so well? Because WWE's never been stronger, because they're doing the brand extension with matches and people without us actually physically thinking about which brands they're on.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that's the beauty of the whole thing right now, is because right now you see, like you mentioned, you're going through the Survivor Series card. Nobody, like, I wasn't even thinking about it until you mentioned that. And like, I was like, oh, they were just good matches. And it's like, for me, like, WWE isn't harping it up, like hyping it up and saying, hey, Raw versus, this is going to be the Raw, match of the night, or SmackDown match of the night. It was just good quality matches. And I'll even do you more. Like, we have all these debuts and this, CM Punk's back. You have Randy Orton back. Which that you got two mega names in the wrestling business that are also back, and it's created some really good storylines since Survivor Series. For example, Randy Orton is now part of SmackDown now. Like, that was until that happened, until like they were starting to negotiate. Between, okay, where's CM Punk going and where is Randy going? I almost forgot we were in a brand extension where, like, all right, certain superstars are on Raw, certain superstars are on SmackDown. You almost forget because you're just like, you know what? You're just going through it and you're just like, all right, It's going to be some good matches tonight, whether it's Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown. It's just quality matches, quality content, promos, everything. Like the product is really good across the board right now. And what I will say is I like the fact that they're making stories out of it. Like Randy Orton, they drew it out just a little bit where he decides, oh, I'm going to go kick the crap out of Roman Reigns, which we know that's building up to a future match with Roman Reigns. So Randy Orton versus Roman Reigns for the championship, that's coming down the pike. I think that's pretty obvious. And then at this point, CM Punk is going to be on Raw. So you're splitting up the two big debuts, or Randy Orton's been out for 18 months. So to me, it's almost like a debut because you almost forget about him for a while. So he's re-debuting to the wrestling fans, to WWE, and then CM Punk, his has been like 10 years or so. So it's cool that we get to run these storylines out. You get to see these debuts. One gets to go to one show, one gets to go to the other. And it's not like one show is better than the other because I think they're both pretty good. It's like the old expression, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. It's really just good quality content right now.
I will say I think SmackDown is the A show. I think SmackDown's better, but I don't think it's because of the talent on SmackDown. I think it's just presented better in a shorter format. We talked obviously about Raw being 3 hours and SmackDown being 2 hours. So I think SmackDown is, to my eyes, the better show because of that. But again,
Here's my issue though. The reason why I keep them pretty even is like Roman Reigns is always gone. Like he's never around. Like for me,
which makes it so that's the thing too. People talk about Roman Reigns not being gone, and that's not fair. But that's kind of, I think WWE subtly has Roman as the SmackDown champion because it's the shorter show, because it's easier to fill 2 hours without the champion there than it is.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. No, that part I 100% agree with. I like the fact, and that's why I keep the scales even. I mean, yes, from maybe, like you said, from a standpoint of like it's a 2 hour show versus 3 hour show, SmackDown being a shorter program, maybe the aesthetics are a little bit better than Raw. But for me as a wrestling fan, and me, we've talked about this years and years ago, but like how Brock Lesnar was champion, he'd show up a few times a year and that was it. Like that's kind of where we're at with Roman Reigns. Like he doesn't show up as often anymore. I like the fact that when I get to watch Raw every week, I'm going to see the heavyweight champion and Seth Rollins on the show. And just like we saw this past week, he put the title on the line in a quality match. So for me, that's why it's like I like it because some weeks Raw is better, some weeks SmackDown is better. And that's not a bad thing because each week you're going to get something really good. And I'll be honest with you, as a wrestling fan, and as wrestling fans as you and I obviously are, to me right now, this is not a good time for AEW because you almost forget about how, AEW because of how good Raw and SmackDown are.
I think, too, with SmackDown, one thing that they have been doing that, a lot of people obviously talk about Roman Reigns not being there and they discount that and get upset about that. But one thing WWE has been doing, got to give them credit for, is they find the way to make SmackDown still have like the bigger, like for example, Randy Orton, right? Either way, whatever brand he was going to sign to, he was still going to make an appearance on SmackDown. And yes, we can assume that CM Punk in the end is going to sign with Raw. But for now, because again, Roman and things like that, even though Roman might be there this week, you're going to have an appearance by CM Punk on SmackDown. So they make sure that, when anyone's a quote unquote free agent, they put them on SmackDown in the shorter show, give them that kind of big spotlight, even if they eventually end up going back, right? You gave Jey Uso the spotlight to main event SmackDown before then you ship him off to Raw. So they find ways to make SmackDown important and put big stars on them when they can. If someone's like a free agent, like a Brock Lesnar, for the time being, he's probably going to do more SmackDown appearances than he will Raw while he's a free agent until he picks one brand or the other kind of thing. So they do make a way to make SmackDown feel big and important. Obviously, it's a 2 hour show. Like, good example, Logan Paul, right? He's on SmackDown. You didn't even realize it, right? Logan Paul's this big megastar. You don't even realize that he's a SmackDown exclusive talent, right? Because he's just transcends and he's on the posters. And when they do the posters, they just put all the wrestlers on them for like the pay-per-views. So you're not picking apart, well, Raw versus SmackDown people, right? But you don't realize it. Yeah, Logan Paul, he's not on Raw. He's a SmackDown exclusive guy. He has the US belt, which is a SmackDown belt, right? So I think they find a way to make SmackDown feel big with the Logan Pauls of the world, and still having a lot of the Bloodline storylines and stuff like that. So they do find a way to make it feel like a bigger show. And I think the women's division right now in SmackDown is probably better, right? You've got Charlotte and Bianca, and Rhea Ripley's holding it down as her own, but I think some of the competition for her on Raw is a little lesser than, it's like Nia Jax and Becky Lynch, which is really good, but, that's about it. But I just think because of those things, it's because, like what you said, when I mentioned you didn't even realize it. And that's what made me bring this up, is because when I was watching Survivor Series, it kind of like clicked to me as like, well, why doesn't Gunther face this person? And then I go, oh yeah, he's on Raw. I completely forget about that, because the storylines with who he's going to face for the Intercontinental Championship seem so organic. They seem so not forced. And I think when you have these brand exclusive pay-per-views, and when you have these brand exclusive announcers, and I know like Wade Barrett's on Raw and he used to be on SmackDown, we have kind of exclusive announcers, right? But Michael Cole's on both, right? And Barrett was on SmackDown, then he moved to Raw, but without it really feeling like a from SmackDown to Raw kind of shift. It just felt like they just switched it up kind of thing. Because of that, because the announcers, because you got Michael Cole on both, because the pay-per-views are a mix of everybody, you just feel like you want the matches on the pay-per-views that have the storylines to go with it. I remember, like Becky Lynch versus Trish obviously wasn't on SummerSlam, and people were wondering why it wasn't on SummerSlam, and I'm getting pushed to Payback the following month. But they weren't thinking because it was like, oh, you had 4 Raw matches and 4 SmackDown matches. It wasn't. It was just because, well, hey, the storyline seems like it's there now. So I think it's great that what they're doing right now is that any match on a pay-per-view is not trying to keep some sort of quota of Raw matches versus SmackDown matches. It's literally just if the storyline is there and the match is there, then you get it. Simple enough. Right. So it's been really organically done. And I hope that WWE keeps this brand extension, however, into the future. I personally, now that we're doing it the way they're doing it, and that's why they've been so successful, because it's a brand extension so subtly telling people, remember years ago telling people that didn't watch wrestling about why they should care versus Raw versus SmackDown, or we're watching a pay-per-view and they're like, oh, where's John Cena? And I'm like, oh, this is a Raw only pay-per-view. And they go, I don't know what that means, and I don't know why I care. And the fact that so many matches at those pay-per-views felt so forced, because you have to have 7 matches on the Raw only pay-per-view, and you're sitting here going, do we have 7 stories on Raw to have matches at a pay-per-view?
Exactly.
So they were just like Tyson Tomkos and all this other crap they were filling in there. And then we had the wild card where people were going back and forth for no reason because the stories weren't there. And right now, who's ever working on these shows is doing a good enough job. And that is why I think, AEW is having a hard time competing with WWE, because they've got 3 brands. They've got NXT, they've got WWE, they've got Raw, and they got SmackDown. And essentially within themselves, they've got their own pay-per-views with, NXT going on, and NXT's doing a good job of keeping things tight and short. They're not trying to put on 3-4 hour pay-per-views with NXT. They know it's a subpar kind of brand, but they're doing okay with it. And NXT to me kind of feels like, if you remember back in the day, remember the SmackDown pay-per-views? Remember how much they kind of sucked? That reminds me of like the NXT pay-per-views. You kind of wonder, is this really a pay-per-view? But give it to NXT a good job. They're not doing pay-per-views every month with them. They're doing them every so often.
Well, speaking of the pay-per-views too, and I, to kind of circle back just a little bit to Raw and SmackDown, the thing I like about what they're doing with the pay-per-views is, and you mentioned it, it's not a Raw exclusive, it's not a SmackDown exclusive show. You're just getting quality matches from both brands, and they're not sitting here talking about it like, oh, we're going to have the Raw match, we're going to have the SmackDown match. It's organic, it's nice and fresh. I think it's really good right now. I think the product is fantastic. There are so many stories that have yet to be told. Like, obviously, the CM Punk portion of it with Seth Rollins, that's going to be fun. Randy Orton and Roman Reigns, that's going to be fun. There's other stories. LA Knight's, going to be doing some great stuff, I'm sure. Like, there's so much going on right now, and it's fun. And